All right, so now we're getting into the fun stuff. This is probably one of the most important lectures that you will get from Metabolic Effect, and perhaps one of the most important educations that you'll get in nutrition, period. Fat loss foods. What exactly do we mean, and why do we call them fat loss foods? Well, first of all, we call them fat loss foods rather than weight loss foods because these foods really help us lose fat primarily. You can certainly cut calories. If you eat less of anything and have a very low calorie diet, you're probably going to lose weight. The issue is that most of the time, research has shown that those types of diets and that type of approach will result in 20 to 50% loss of muscle. That really comes from the training that you looked at, the beginning training that got you into this program in the first place, which essentially says that we want to maintain muscle and not lose it. And we want to lose primarily fat. If we lose muscle, we risk that weight gain yo-yo effect that we're all so scared of. So fat loss foods are foods that really are helping us focus on fat loss. When we think of fat loss, if you remember that formula, most people think it works like this. Most people think you go on a diet, you cut calories, and in response you lose weight, and then you have a balanced metabolism because of that. That's exactly wrong. It's really you develop a balanced metabolism, then you will naturally eat less without trying and calories will be reduced, and then you'll lose weight effortlessly, and not just weight, but fat. Fat loss foods help you do that. They help balance your hormonal biochemistry. They help balance your hormonal metabolism. But you don't have to worry about all these fancy names for hormones like leptin and ghrelin and catecholamines and insulin because you know your hormonal metabolism is balanced if your hunger, energy, and cravings are in check. If your HEC is in check, you know you have hormonal balance. And fat loss foods tend to keep our HEC in check. Now remember, go back to the previous videos. There is going to be some metabolic uniqueness here. There is going to be some psychology associated with this. We are going to have personal preferences that come along with this. Some of us love these types of foods. Some of us do not. Some of us will need a little bit more starch and fat. Some of us can do without those things. But the key thing to understand is that fat loss foods and a fat loss meal are foods or are a meal that keeps your hunger from coming back. So when you eat a meal or a snack, you're not hungry for the next 4 to 6 hours. It keeps your energy stable. When you eat these foods, your energy is nice and stable. You don't have these energy crashes after lunch. And your cravings for the next 4 to 6 hours are non-existent. You don't crave a diet soda or a Snickers bar because these foods keep things in check. Now, in general, now remember, and this is the thing that's going to frustrate you about this training, but I'm going to keep saying it over and over and over again because it's so important. In general, you want to focus on foods that are rich in protein, fiber, and water. But remember, you are unique, and that's the part that is tough for people to remember, that not all of these foods, some of my fat loss foods might be a fat storing food for you, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. But in general, fat loss foods control HEC. They keep your HEC in check. They're also rich in protein, fiber, and water, and they're lower in sugar, starch, and fat. Now notice here I did not say absent of sugar, starch, and fat. They're lower in sugar, starch, and fat than protein, fiber, and water. For instance, broccoli is a fat loss food. High in fiber, high in water, but low in starch, sugar, and fat. A bison, buffalo meat, or chicken meat is a fat loss food for most people. It's higher in protein and devoid of a whole lot of sugar, starch, and fat. Now, it does not mean that we're saying fat is bad. It does not mean we're saying starch is bad either. We're saying that typically the foods that will keep your hunger in check, stabilize energy, and keep your cravings at bay while helping you lose fat are going to be rich in protein, fiber, and water relative to their starch, sugar, and fat content. Absolutely, you're going to need to eat some starch, and some people more than others. Absolutely, you're going to need to be able to eat some fat, and some people more than others. But in general, these fat loss foods have more protein, fiber, and water than sugar, starch, and fat. And one of the other things that these fat loss foods have is they have low food reward. Now, what the hell does that mean, Jade? What that means is that there are certain foods that we know that when you eat them cause hedonism, meaning they cause you to want to eat more of them just by the pleasure of the food itself. And these foods tend to be rich in 3 elements and any combination of these elements. Sugar/starch, that's one element. Salt, that's the other element. And fat. Foods that are rich and combine sugar and fat, or starch and fat, or salt and sugar and fat, these things cause a food reward feedback system, and we will tend to overeat them. This is the reason why we want burgers and french fries and want to keep eating those. It's the same reason why we can overeat pizza but won't overeat chicken and broccoli. It's the difference between a very palatable meal and a meal that might be a little bit more bland. Chicken and broccoli may be a little bit more bland versus something like steak and potatoes with sour cream and butter on the potato. That's an example here. Or pastries. That's an example. So in general, you want to be eating foods rich in protein, fiber, and water, lower in starch, sugar, and fat, not devoid of those things, and avoid this sort of food combination that will make you overeat at a meal. Those things include things that are rich in salt, things that are rich in sugar, and things that are rich in fat when they are combined together. Sugar and fat, salt and sugar, fat and salt, these things tend to make us overeat. So it's really critical that you understand this. Now let me say one thing before we end this particular video. There is no such thing as a food when you eat it that's going to burn fat. As a matter of fact, that is a complete myth that has been perpetuated in the nutrition and diet and exercise world. It simply is not true. As a matter of fact, typically when you eat, doesn't matter what you eat, you're moving into more of a storage state because you're taking in calories, you're taking in nutrition. There is no such thing as a food that is going to make you burn fat. What fat loss foods do is they make it more likely that you'll eat less food later. In other words, a low-calorie, healthy meal is neither low-calorie or healthy if it leads to overeating the wrong foods later, right? So let's say you have a huge salad at lunch, and then you starve yourself the rest of the day. Well, that salad was healthy, but if eating that salad makes you overeat and binge on pizza later in the evening, that was not a good choice for you. When you focus on PFW, protein, fiber, and water, that's where you want to start. That's the structure part. The flexibility part comes in with how much of this sugar, starch, and fat can you tolerate. So a typical fat loss meal would look something like this. Here's a plate. We want, remember, protein, fiber, and water. Well, vegetables are a huge source of both water and fiber, and they're low in starch, sugar. So this would be maybe broccoli and green beans and maybe a starter salad. And then you're going to have a situation where you have a piece of protein, right, that's a little bit leaner, and I'll explain the fat thing in a little bit for those of you who get all upset about fat and how we say you should cut fat, because we're not saying cut fat, but I'll get to that in just a minute. And then the starch and or sugar component. Now, based on this meal, right, vegetables, broccoli, green beans, chicken breast, and brown rice. Based on how that makes you feel, you may want to add a little bit more fat here, maybe add some avocado or something like that, or a little bit more starch. So maybe your meal looks a little bit more like that, where my meal looks a little bit like this. So the structure part is to build your plate around fiber and water and protein, and then adjust and tweak with fat and starch. And one of the best ways to do this is, rather than having your protein come along with fat, add fat in addition. So you notice I'll choose bison meat or game meat or chicken or something like that that is very low fat. And then I'll add in nuts, avocado, and other plant fats, olive oils, coconut oil, that kind of thing is my fat source. That's how you want to think about this. So this is your sort of introduction into fat loss foods, understanding there is no magic food that burns fat. These foods just make it less likely that you're going to overeat the wrong things later. They have these principles. They control HEC, they're rich in protein, fiber, and water, they're lower in sugar, starch, and fat, and they have a low food reward. They do not combine salt, sugar, and fat. That is key. And then you have to understand that that's the structure, and the flexibility part is how much fat and starch can you tolerate. So hopefully this is a really clear indication for you of how to adjust for fat loss foods and what exactly they are. Let's talk about them further in the next few videos.